Each of these flights started out just like any other, but in the blink of an eye, everything changed. Have you ever wondered what happens when a pilot loses focus at the worst possible moment? Could something as simple as fatigue or distraction really lead to a disaster? The truth is, even the smallest mistakes in the cockpit can have serious consequences. To believe this, you need to watch these 5 shocking aviation disasters where pilot distraction or exhaustion led to unimaginable outcomes.
They have the right to preserve their life.
Nastiest scenes that I think I've seen.
We also have to look at the operator.
Number 5. Helios Airways Flight 522, a flight with no one in control. On August 14, 2005, Helios Airways Flight 522, a Boeing 737, took off from Larnaca, Cyprus, heading to Athens, Greece. It was supposed to be a routine flight, but what happened next was beyond imagination. Shortly after takeoff, an important system check was missed. The aircraft's pressurization system had been left in manual mode instead of automatic. This meant that as the plane climbed, oxygen levels in the cabin began to drop, but no one noticed in time. As the minutes passed, passengers and crew started feeling strange. Oxygen deprivation, or hypoxia, makes people dizzy, confused, and eventually unconscious. The pilots received an alert that something was wrong, but instead of realizing the true danger, they got distracted, trying to diagnose a non-existent air conditioning issue. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. The oxygen masks deployed, but the crew had already lost too much awareness. The aircraft kept flying on autopilot towards Athens while no one was in control. Greek fighter jets were sent to intercept the plane when it failed to respond to air traffic control. Through their cockpit windows, they saw something chilling, both pilots unconscious and a lone flight attendant desperately trying to take control. But with little experience in flying, there was nothing he could do. The plane eventually ran out of fuel and descended into the hills of Greece. This incident became one of the most discussed cases of hypoxia in aviation history. Number 4. Colgan Air Flight 3407, a fatigue-induced reaction. On February 12, 2009, Colgan Air Flight 3407, a Bombardier Dash 8, was making its way from Newark, New Jersey to Buffalo, New York. The flight seemed normal, but there was an underlying issue. Both pilots were exhausted. The captain had slept in a lounge the night before instead of getting proper rest. The first officer had taken a long commute to work, leaving her equally tired. As the plane approached Buffalo, everything seemed fine, until a stall warning suddenly activated. A stall happens when a plane loses lift and starts to drop. In this situation, pilots are trained to push the nose down and increase power. But the tired captain instinctively pulled up instead, making the situation worse. Within seconds, the aircraft lost control and descended rapidly. Investigators found that the lack of sleep had affected the pilot's judgment and reactions. This incident led to major changes in airline regulations, including stricter rules on pilot rest requirements. Number 3. Eastern Airlines Flight 401, a simple light led to disaster. On the night of December 29, 1972, Eastern Airlines Flight 401, a Lockheed L-1011, was making its way from New York to Miami. The flight was smooth, and everything was going according to plan until the crew started focusing on a single tiny issue. As the plane prepared for landing, the pilots lowered the landing gear. But a small green indicator light, which was supposed to confirm that the gear was locked in place, did not turn on. The crew became completely fixated on this problem. They tried checking the bulb, removing it, and even replacing it. But in their distraction, no one noticed that the autopilot had been disconnected. Without realizing it, the aircraft began a slow descent. The pilots were so busy trying to fix the light that they did not notice their altitude dropping. By the time they realized, it was too late. The aircraft hit the Florida Everglades, breaking apart on impact. Later investigations found that the landing gear was actually working fine. It was just the light bulb that had failed. A tiny distraction had led to a massive disaster. Number 2. Air India Express, Flight 812, the captain who slept through the flight. On May 22, 2010, Air India Express Flight 812, a Boeing 737, was flying from Dubai to Mangalore, India. Captains Zlatko Glusica and his first officer were in command. However, there was a serious problem right from the start. The captain was extremely tired. According to later reports, Captain Glusica had slept through most of the flight. When it was time to land, he woke up feeling disoriented and groggy, but instead of letting his well-rested co-pilot take control, he insisted on landing the plane himself. As they approached the runway, alarms started going off. The plane was coming in too fast and too high, making it unsafe to land. The co-pilot repeatedly warned the captain that they should go around and try again, but the captain ignored him. The aircraft touched down too late, with very little runway left. The pilots tried to stop, but it was impossible. The plane overshot the runway and went down a steep hill at the end of the airport. Investigators later found that if the captain had been more alert, he would have listened to his co-pilot's warnings and avoided the accident. This flight became a textbook example of why pilot fatigue is a serious risk in aviation. Number 1. Northwest Airlines, Flight 188, the flight that overshot its destination. On October 21, 2009, Northwest Airlines Flight 188 was flying from San Diego to Minneapolis. Everything was normal, but then something strange happened. Air traffic controllers lost contact with the pilots. For over an hour, they tried to reach the flight, but there was no response. The plane was cruising on autopilot, and military jets were preparing to intercept it. Then, out of nowhere, the pilots finally responded. But by this time, they had overshot their destination by 150 miles. So, what happened? Investigators found that the pilots were distracted by their personal laptops. They were discussing a new scheduling system for their airline and didn't notice that they had missed multiple calls from air traffic control. Fortunately, no one was harmed in this case, but the incident raised serious concerns about cockpit discipline. The pilots were fired, and airlines introduced stricter rules about electronic devices in the cockpit. Distraction and fatigue are two of the biggest dangers in aviation. Whether it's focusing on the wrong issue, ignoring warnings, or simply not getting enough rest, even the smallest mistakes can lead to serious consequences. These incidents remind us that in aviation, every second counts, and staying focused is a matter of life and death.